Chapter 1. The Widow of Gray Falls. 1873. Gray Falls, Montana Territory. The town hadn't seen a cloud in weeks, yet on the day Sheriff Thomas Moore was buried, the sky wept like it had known him. Gray Falls was a dust-and-guts kind of town. Men spit tobacco on sidewalks, and women clutched their prayer books as tightly as their secrets. But today, the only sound was the dragging of boots through dry gravel and the heavy sobs of a woman in black. Lila Moore. She was 29, a widow now, though her youth made the title feel like a cruel joke. Her dark hair was pinned back in a modest bun, but the wild curls around her temples betrayed her effort. Her green eyes, usually bright, were dulled by a fog of grief and something else, fear, regret. The town whispered about her behind lace curtains. Some said she was too quiet. Others said she wasn't mourning enough. A few whispered that maybe she'd never truly loved the sheriff at all. But Lila, stoic, graceful, carried herself like a woman with too many secrets and too little time. The sheriff's death had been clean, a bullet from a gang he'd nearly wiped out in the winter raids. His funeral was well attended. The town respected justice, and Lila had always stood behind her husband's badge. But no one knew the long silences between them or the locked drawer in his desk. That night, as Lila sat alone on her porch, sipping cold coffee in her morning dress, something strange happened. A letter. No rider came, no mail wagon passed through. It was just there, in the rocker beside hers, as if the wind had tucked it there gently. Her hand trembled as she opened the envelope, the paper smelling faintly of cedar and tobacco. You don't know me, but I knew your husband, and I owe him and you a truth the whole town would bury if it could. Signed, C. Lila looked out into the dark, over the silhouettes of pine trees that lined the hills. The wind whispered against her ears like a warning. A letter from a stranger, a name with no face, and a promise of truth. Her grief was now tangled with suspicion. She folded the letter slowly and slipped it into her apron pocket. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was the keeper of a secret someone risked their life to tell her. And Gray Falls. Gray Falls had never been good at keeping secrets. Gray Falls. 3 days later, the mornings in Gray Falls were beginning to burn hotter, like summer had arrived early just to dry up whatever tears the town had left. But Lila wasn't crying anymore. She hadn't told a soul about the letter. Not Preacher Lowell. Not Mrs. Withers, who brought her stew every evening. And certainly not Deputy Harris, who'd started showing up uninvited with clumsy offerings of chopped wood and unnecessary concern. Lila kept the first letter hidden behind the lining of her corset. It was safer there, close to her heart, protected by steel boning and stitched silk. She reread it every night, memorizing the way each curve of ink hinted at something deeper, something dangerous. Then, on the third day, another letter came. But this time, it wasn't left quietly on the porch. It was nailed to her door, and it was smeared with blood. The wood around the nail was cracked from the force, and the crimson streaks hadn't dried yet. Whoever had left it had been nearby recently. Lila's heart hammered as she stared at it. Her instinct screamed to run, but her curiosity, and something more stubborn, made her reach for it. This envelope was thicker, coarser, and smelled faintly of gunpowder. Inside was a folded sheet and a torn playing card. A queen of hearts, ripped in half. He wasn't who you thought. He owed debts to men who never forget, and now they're coming for what he took. See, beneath the message was a sketch map, a place just outside Gray Falls, a rotting cabin in the woods, the same one where outlaws were rumored to hide in winter. Lila clutched the paper tight, her mind spinning. She had buried a husband. Now she was being pulled into his unfinished war. Who was this, see? A friend? A foe? A ghost from her husband's past? Or her only chance at finding out who Thomas really was? She burned the second letter in her stove, but not before copying the map. That night, she didn't sleep. She cleaned her late husband's revolver, packed a small satchel, and wrapped the half of the Queen of Hearts in a ribbon before slipping it into her boot. The widow of Gray Falls was no longer waiting for answers. She was going out to find them, with or without permission. The pines stood like quiet sentinels over the hidden trail. Lila's boots crushed brittle twigs as she made her way deeper into the woods, guided only by the crude map and the hum of her heartbeat in her ears. Gray Falls disappeared behind her like a ghost town in fog, replaced by the eerie stillness of forest shadows and chirping cicadas. Every crunch underfoot made her flinch. She wasn't sure if it was fear or anticipation that made her grip the revolver tighter. The trail curved around a dying stream, and then she saw it, the cabin. It leaned to one side, half consumed by ivy and time. The windows were boarded. The roof sagged, and yet there was smoke trailing weakly from the chimney. Someone was inside. Lila crouched low, her back pressed against a pine trunk. She watched for 10 whole minutes. No movement, no sound, just that teasing thread of smoke curling into the air. With a deep breath, she stepped into the clearing. Her boot sank slightly into the damp soil. "Anyone in there?" she called, voice steady. No answer. She approached the door, revolver raised. With a shove, it creaked open. Inside was a single room, dark but warm. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and next to it sat a table with a third letter. No person, no sound, just a letter, and a black hat, the kind outlaws wore when they didn't want to be remembered. Lila moved closer. The letter was addressed plainly. Lila Moore, don't trust the badge. He was never just yours. Neither are the lies he left behind. Meet me tomorrow. Same place. Sunset. Come alone. See. Lila stared at the signature. Her late husband had worn the badge. Was C warning her about him or someone else? Suddenly, the floorboard near the back wall creaked. Lila turned sharply. Her revolver clicked. "Who's there?" she demanded. Silence. Then a whisper breath, a shadow disappearing behind the cabin. She darted outside, heart in her throat, eyes scanning the woods. Too late. Whoever had been inside was gone. But one thing was certain. The game had just begun. The bell above the general store door jingled, breaking the dusty silence of mid-morning Gray Falls. Lila stepped inside, the tension of the forest cabin still clinging to her like burrs on her coat. She wasn't here to shop. As she approached the counter, something on the notice board caught her eye. Yellowed paper, tacked unevenly with a rusted nail, a wanted poster. Lila's heart stalled. It was his face. Her late husband, Sheriff Elijah Moore. Wanted, dead or alive. A $500 bounty, issued out of Prescott County. Date stamped just 6 weeks before his accidental death. Lila blinked, stumbled back a step, nearly knocking over a crate of canned beans. The store clerk, young Tommy Jenkins, looked up. "You all right, Mrs. Moore?" She didn't answer. She was staring at the words burned into her mind. Wanted, Elijah Moore, for robbery of federal gold transport. Armed and dangerous. Known alias, E. Black. Alias? She ripped the poster from the board and stormed out. She needed answers, and there was only one person now who might have them. The preacher. Reverend Thatch had been Elijah's confidant, his closest friend besides Lila. He'd been at the cabin the night Elijah died. He'd delivered the eulogy. He'd held Lila's hand while she sobbed. And maybe he'd lied. The church, the white-clapboard church, stood just past the cemetery, where Elijah was buried. Its steeple reached for heaven, but something about it now fell hollow. Lila pushed open the door. The pews were empty. Reverend Thatch stood by the altar, wiping dust from a brass candlestick. He looked up and smiled. "Lila, you look pale, child. Sit down." She didn't. She tossed the wanted poster onto the nearest pew. "Why is my husband's face on this?" she asked, voice sharp, cracking. Thatch stared at it for a long beat, then sighed. "I was hoping you'd never see that." Lila felt the air in her chest compress. "You knew?" "I knew he had secrets," Thatch said softly. "The kind of man takes to his grave. But I never knew for sure if they were true. Just rumors. Until a man came asking about him yesterday, left that poster behind." Lila's hands trembled. "A man?" He nodded. "Wore gray. A writer from Arizona. Said he was looking for E. Black. Said the name Elijah Moore was just a mask." "Did he leave a name?" she asked. "He only gave an initial," Thatch said, voice barely above a whisper. "See." Gray Falls hadn't seen a stranger in days. That alone made the man in the gray coat stand out. But it wasn't just a coat. It was the way he walked. Like he didn't trust the ground, like he'd slept too many nights under stars with one eye open. He tethered his horse outside the saloon and stepped in without a word. Inside, the air shifted. Men paused mid-pour, women mid-whisper. The piano player stopped before his next note. Lila wasn't there, but if she had been, she would have noticed what others missed. He looked nothing like a bounty hunter. He looked like a ghost from another time, one who carried secrets and the scent of gunpowder and regret. The man ordered water, scanned the room, and then quietly asked the barkeep, "That widow? Lila Moore. Where might I find her?" Lila sat by the fireplace with a journal, scribbling through shaking fingers. He lied to me about who he was, about everything. And now I get letters in his handwriting. The fourth letter had arrived that morning. Just 2 words. Trust no one. This one wasn't poetic like the others. No talk of moonlight or regrets. It was urgent, chilling. A knock sounded at the door. She jumped. Another knock, louder. She grabbed the rifle Elijah had left in the hallway. She didn't trust easily anymore. Not since her husband turned out to be a fugitive. And dead. But when she opened the door, she wasn't prepared for what she saw. The man in the gray coat. He stood there with a neutral expression, coat dusty, gloves in one hand. "Mrs. Moore," he asked. She kept the rifle trained on his chest. "Who wants to know?" He raised one eyebrow. "A man who knew your husband, and a man who's trying not to get shot before supper." Lila didn't flinch. "Name?" "Call me Carson." "Carson. See, the man the preacher mentioned." "Why are you here?" she asked. Carson hesitated. "Because the past is catching up to us all, ma'am. And your husband, he left more behind than just you." He pulled a burned notebook from his coat pocket. Its edges singed, some pages missing. It bore Elijah's initials. Lila froze. "Where did you get that?" "I took it off a body in Tucson last week. The man had your husband's badge, and this." Carson handed it to her. Inside the cover, Elijah's handwriting scrawled, "If anything happens to me, find Lila. Protect the journal. Trust no lawman." And beneath that, a name circled in red ink. Baron Thorne. Lila's eyes widened. Baron Thorne. The same man who offered to fund Elijah's funeral, who helped her repair a roof, who offered kind words and favors, who smiled too easily, who arrived just after Elijah died. Baron Thorne had always been 2 things in Gray Falls: respected and mysterious. He arrived 3 weeks after Elijah Moore's death, said he'd been a friend of the sheriff's from his Texas days, offered Lila his condolences, paid for the new church bell, sent flowers every Sunday, and now his name was circled in Elijah's notebook. Lila stared at it like it would change, but it didn't. She glanced up at Carson. "You sure about this?" He nodded once. "You ever ask how the Baron made his fortune?" She shook her head. Carson snorted. "Then you're one of 3 people in Gray Falls who hasn't." The journal read like a trail of unfinished business. Elijah had been investigating something, or someone: land deeds, train schedules, payoffs to marshals. Several led back to Baron Thorne. Carson leaned over the table, pointing at a page. "See here. He notes a property fire outside Canyon Ridge. The owner vanished. No body, just ashes. What's that got to do with Thorne?" Lila asked. Carson tapped a note. "BT paid off Marshal Larkin to close case. No investigation." "Why?" Lila's stomach sank. Carson continued. "Your husband was sniffing around too much. My guess? He got too close." 3 years earlier, Baron Thorne rode into town with a wagon of whiskey barrels and a velvet coat worth more than the saloon. He set up a distillery, bought up half the land near the river, and claimed to be bringing prosperity. People loved him for it. Only Elijah didn't trust him. The man had too many questions answered too quickly, and too many friends in the law. Now Lila realized Thorne hadn't just been helping her out of kindness. He'd been watching her. Lila closed the journal. Firm. "I'm going to talk to him." Carson raised a brow. "You planning on bringing that rifle?" "No." she said, slipping a small pistol into her boot. "This time I want to hear his lies up close." Baron Thorne's home was built like a fortress. Stone walls, high hedges, 2 guards at the front. He was in the garden, sipping something brown from a crystal glass. "Lila," he said warmly when she approached, "to what do I owe this twilight visit?" "I read my husband's journal," she said plainly. "Your name came up. A lot." His smile didn't fade. "Did it now?" "You were lying to me from the moment you showed up." He chuckled softly, leaning against the railing. "You're clever, Widow Moore, but cleverness won't keep you warm in this town." She stepped closer. "Neither will deceit. Why did you help pay for Elijah's funeral?" Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Because I owed him. Not friendship, not loyalty, just a debt, and now I'm settling it." He turned to leave. "You know who killed him, don't you?" she asked. He paused at the door. "Maybe, but you should ask yourself something else, Miss Moore." He looked over his shoulder, smirk darkening. "What do you really know about the man you married?" Then he disappeared inside. Chapter 7. The ledger in the attic. The storm broke that night. Not outside, but inside Lila Moore. The Baron's cryptic warning, the mounting suspicion, Elijah's secret journal, all stirred something fierce in her. Grief had kept her mourning. But now she was angry. And angry widows don't just cry, they investigate. Carson brought over the last of Elijah's boxes. "He told me to give you this if anything ever happened to him." Lila stared at the dust-covered trunk. She'd been avoiding the attic for weeks. It still smelled like pine sweat and worn leather, her husband sent lingering like a ghost. She lit a lantern and climbed up. The attic creaked like an old confession. In a far corner, she found the chest. Inside, maps, receipts, a small velvet pouch of gold coins, and a ledger with a cracked brown cover. It wasn't Elijah's handwriting. The ledger. Lila flipped through the pages. It was a record of payoffs, land swaps, and backroom dealings, a decade of corruption. Names she recognized. Judge McAllister, Sheriff Daniels from Fort Jasper, even Mayor Tomlin. But what froze her hand was this. Payment received from BT for rail expansion vote. Dead witnesses. 2. Carson read over her shoulder. BT Baron Thorne. Lila nodded, eyes narrowed. This ledger is a noose. And I think Elijah planned to hang someone with it. That night, someone broke into the house. The windows shattered. Boots scuffed the floor. Lila heard the floorboards creak just before the intruder reached the attic. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She waited in the shadows, Colt revolver in hand. When the man crept toward the trunk, Lila stepped out. Looking for something? He spun around, and she shot him in the leg. Carson helped tie the man to a chair. He was young, nervous, bleeding. "Who sent you?" Lila asked. The man groaned. "You don't know who you're messing with." Lila cocked the revolver. "Try me." "Baron Thorne," he spat. "Said you had something that didn't belong to you." Lila stared him down. "It belonged to my husband, and now it belongs to justice." The next morning, Lila mailed a copy of the ledger to U.S. Marshal Harlan Graves in Santa Fe. She kept the original. "I'm not done yet," she told Carson. "If Elijah died fighting shadows, I'm going to drag them into the light." Chapter 8. The Hangman's List. The wind shifted in Gray Falls. Not the kind that rustled leaves, but the kind that whispers death. The kind that carries word across saloons and poker tables. The sheriff's widow has a ledger. Lila Moore had started something. And the people in that book? They didn't plan to let her finish it. In a smoke-filled parlor room at the edge of town, Baron Thorne met with 2 men in black coats. Former Pinkertons. Now bounty hunters. "She's bluffing," one said, "chewing on tobacco." "She shot a man in her kitchen," Thorne replied, voice sharp. "She's not bluffing. She's building a noose with all our names on it." He poured whiskey and stared out the window. "Make it look like an accident. I don't want blood on church steps." That Sunday, Lila walked past the old church Elijah used to patrol. She left flowers by his grave, whispering prayers through clenched teeth. Just as she turned, a figure on horseback, appear behind the oak tree. Dark hat, long coat, watching her, waiting. Carson came running from the chapel steps. "Lila, get down." A bullet cracked through the air, splintered the wooden cross behind her. Lila and Carson dove into the woods behind the church. Twigs snapped beneath their boots. Horses thundered behind them. "They're not bounty hunters," Lila gasped, breath ragged. "They're cleaners. Hitmen." Carson grunted as a bullet grazed his arm. Lila helped him to a creek and crouched beside him, hands shaking. "I started something I don't know how to finish," she whispered. Carson smiled faintly. "Then it's time you met someone who does." The telegram she sent? It reached Santa Fe. By sundown, a tall, lean man in a dusty coat and a wide-brimmed black hat stepped off the stagecoach. A silver badge glinted at his chest. He carried no smile, but plenty of reputation. Marshal Harlan Graves. The undertaker flinched when he saw him. Kids hid behind crates. He was the kind of man people feared for good reasons. He found Lila outside the general store. "You Moore?" he asked, voice like gravel. Lila nodded. "You Graves?" He nodded back. "Let's go hunting." In the marshal's saddlebag was a list. Cross-reference names from Lila's ledger and his federal warrants. "We're not just cleaning up Gray Falls," he told her. "We're gutting a whole network. Judge McAllister, Mayor Tomlin, Sheriff Daniels. Every one of them's gonna hang." Graves muttered, "Or burn." Lila stared at the paper. Her hands trembled, but not with fear, with purpose. "Let's start with the judge," she said. Chapter 9, Justice Rides in Black. By morning, word spread like spilled whiskey on a saloon floor. Marshal Harlan Graves was in town, and that meant one thing. Somebody was going to hang. Judge Ambrose McAllister wore gold rings and a silver tongue. He'd sentenced men for stealing bread, then took bribes from cattle thieves and traffickers. When Graves and Lila entered the courthouse, McAllister smirked. "I assume this is about the widow's fairy tale," he said, waving them off. Graves dropped the ledger on his desk with a thud. "This ledger ain't fiction, Judge, but you might want to pray it's the last book your name appears in." Lila leaned forward. "You signed warrants to kill men who knew your secrets," she said. McAllister's eyes flinched. His hand moved toward his desk drawer. Too late. Graves pinned it shut with his boot. "You just bought yourself a rope," he muttered. As Graves escorted McAllister to the jail, 3 masked men ambushed them near the old saloon. Gunfire tore through the street. Horses screamed. A whiskey barrel exploded. Graves shoved Lila behind a trough. "I thought this town had a sheriff," he barked. "We did," Lila said. "He's buried next to the church you were shot at." With no time to reload, Graves tackled one gunman and used the butt of his Colt to knock him cold. Lila grabbed a shotgun from the saloon wall and fired a blast that sent the second attacker flying. McAllister tried to flee, but ran straight into Carson's fist. "Nice punch," Graves said. Carson grinned. 7 years of unresolved tension. That night, with the judge in chains, the trio met at the widow's cabin. They placed candles around the room. Graves poured bourbon. Lila stacked firewood. Carson unwrapped his arm, now stitched from the earlier graze. "You weren't always a lawman, were you?" Carson asked Graves. The marshal stared into the fire. "I was something worse," he said. "I enforced peace for men who sold chaos. Now I settle debts." Lila looked up. "Then we're on the same side." Before dawn, Graves found Lila alone at Elijah's grave. "He wasn't just my husband," she whispered. "He was my shield." Graves didn't respond. She turned to him. "You think I'm foolish for keeping this fight going?" "No," Graves said, kneeling. "I think you're dangerous, and that scares the men in charge." Lila let out a tired laugh. "Good. I want them scared." Chapter 10. The Widow, the Ledger, and the Reckoning. The sun rose blood orange over Gray Falls. The air held a tension so sharp it could slice a throat. The Ledger had one name left. Baron Elias Crow, the man who'd built the town, owned the mine, the mill, and most of the graves, and the man who paid Elijah Moore to die. Lila stood before the town hall, wearing Elijah's badge. The townsfolk gathered slowly. Farmers, blacksmiths, whores, choir singers. They came for the reckoning. This town belongs to the people who buried their kin under its soil, she declared. Crow watched from the balcony of his estate with a wine glass in hand. You think this little uprising scares me? He said to his guards. I bought this town, and I'll bury if I have to. That night, fire engulfed Crow's grain stores. It wasn't the people. It was Lila and Carson and Graves. Cut off the head, Graves said, but first star the hands. They lit the fire and left a note pinned to the burning barn door. You robbed a town. You killed a man. The widow is coming. Crow's men stood guard outside his estate. Shotguns, Gatling, torches. Lila walked straight through them, wearing black lace and Elijah's revolver at her hip. Graves flanked her left, Carson her right, and behind them, Gray Falls rose up like thunder. The townspeople brought lanterns, pitchforks, and resolve. Crow shouted from his balcony, You think you're heroes? You're peasants. Lila raised a ledger. Then this peasant's pen is mightier than your blood money. Crow drew his pistol. Graves fired first. The shot shattered Crow's wine glass and his shoulder. He fell to his knees, bleeding and whimpering. Lila walked up the steps. You wrote my husband's death in ink. I write your sentence in fire. By dawn, Crow sat locked in the same jail cell once built for his enemies. His empire dissolved. His guards gone. Graves left town silently, not even goodbye. Carson kissed Lila's hand at the station. You ever tire of justice? Come find me where the sun sets late. Months later, Lila reopened Elijah's office, not as a sheriff's hall, but as a Freetown printing press. She printed stories, names, ledgers, truths once buried beneath gold and gunpowder. On her desk sat one last letter. No return address. Inside, a feather, a small painting of a cabin, and 6 words. The fire and you lit mine. The Bandit. She smiled. Gray Falls had found its voice again. The end. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe.